Hey everybody, it's John McBride. I'm a developer advocate and technology evangelist here at Citrix. And in this video, I wanted to show you how to get up and running really quick with a Yeoman generator that we have for Netscaler. So what is Yeoman? Yeoman is basically a scaffolding application that helps you scaffold out an application or some sample apps, builds out the project structure, gets you kind of ready to go with an application. That's an open source generator. You can get to that by going to yeoman.io. We can show you that here real quick. And there's a lot of different generators that Yeoman has. There's stuff for NPM and Rails and .NET and a bunch of different generators. We actually have one for Citrix Netscaler that targets the NITRO APIs. That's an open source project. It's on our Citrix GitHub page that you can fork and clone and add to it if you'd like. But you can also get to it through our GitHub page. So if you go to citrix.github.io, you'll see it here on the left here. It's the Yeoman sample scaffolder for Netscaler. It's an open source project like I talked about, and then you can clone it, you can do whatever you want, but we also have a getting started guide here in the repository. So in this video, we're actually going to walk through this and we'll show you how to get going with the Yeoman generator. Some of the prereqs for this tutorial is you're going to need either a Netscaler device or you can get the Netscaler CPX Docker container. That's available from Micro Load Balancer. We'll also put a link in the video for that. But we have that all listed out under the required software section on the README. For this video, we're actually running on a Mac, and I actually have Docker installed, Docker for Mac installed, and the Netscaler CPX up and running here. The next thing you want to do is this generator uses .NET Core, which is Microsoft's .NET cross-platform tools. They run on Mac, Linux, and Windows. We actually use that to kind of build up our samples. So you're going to want to get .NET Core installed. And we actually have a link here on the README that tells you how to go ahead and do that. So we'll actually get that up and running, or we'll get that installed here pretty quick. So we'll say open link. You're going to want to, so this is .NET Core. You're going to want to, go with the current one, and then I'm going to get mine for Mac OS. But you can see here's a Linux version and also a Windows version. So we'll actually, create another video that shows you how to get running with those. But for now, we're just going to get the Mac OS version. All right, so we download it. We're actually going to go ahead and install that now. I'll put in my password, and we have .NET installed, and we can show you. So yeah, we'll say move that to trash. So now if we do .NET, you can see we actually have .NET here. So cool. So what's the next thing we're going to have to get installed? So the next thing is we're actually going to need Yeoman. Yeoman's an NPM module based on Node.js. So you want to go ahead and get that installed. So we can just copy this command here, sudo npm install. Now what this is going to do is, like I said, install Yeoman. But it's going to install Yeoman globally, meaning you'll be able to use the yo command from any directory, not just your local directory. Go ahead and put my super secret password in there. And that's going to download and install Yeoman and all its dependencies onto our system here. And then the next thing we're going to install is the actual Yeoman generator for Netscaler, and you can see that's the next line here. So that's our Netscaler generator. So same thing, sudo, we're going to say npm install this generator globally, and then here's the name of the generator, generator-citrix-netscaler. So that's going to go ahead and install. Well, that's installing. Uh, on the README, you can see there's a couple of videos. We have a couple how-to getting started videos on getting Docker for Mac and Docker for Windows set up and then running Netscaler CPX within those containers. So this is a really good way of getting up and running with the Netscaler CPX container to actually starting to do some developer kind of scripts or configuration, different things like that. So ultimately, you'd want to move this over to the supported Ubuntu and Netscaler CPX environment. But just for doing a little bit of development work, getting started with the NITRO APIs, understanding them, trying to test some things out, this is a really great development platform. Officially, it's our Netscaler CPX is supported on Ubuntu, but this, like I said, is a good way of getting started pretty quick with doing some development work. All right, so now we have the Yeoman generator. So we have, just to recap, we've installed .NET Core for Mac OS. We've installed the Yeoman generator, and then we've installed this Citrix Netscaler generator. So those are the kind of three prerequisites from a development platform standpoint, and then you need Docker, the Netscaler CPX Docker container. And we can show you there that we have the container installed, so the CPX container installed. We're actually going to go ahead and start it here. So that's going to go ahead and start, and now we can run a Docker PS to show us that it's actually running. And this is important here. So localhost port 32776 is mapped to the container port of 80. We talk about this in the Getting Started guide for running Netscaler CPX on Mac or Linux, or I'm sorry, Mac or Windows. So if you want to understand really what this is, go check out those videos. Those videos are linked in the README documentation and on the GitHub site. Okay, so we have the container installed, we have the Yeoman Citrix generator installed, we have .NET installed. So how do we get started? Well, in the README, we just say yo Citrix Netscaler. So let's go ahead and try that. So we're going to say yo Citrix Netscaler. Now remember, yo is the command for Yeoman, so it's the scaffolding engine. And then we say we want you to run the Citrix Netscaler generator. So let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. Okay, so we get the Netscaler generator. Basically, we get a welcome message, excellent, and it's going to prompt us for some information. So the first thing is enter your project name. It's going to default to the directory. So let's go ahead and make a directory here before we get started. So we're going to say make demo, and then let's go ahead and change into that directory. Cool. So now we're going to rerun the generator. And we're going to say, okay, enter your project name. Cool. So it's going to default to the directory name that you're in. So we're going to just default and say demo. Now, what's your Netscaler IP address? This could be any Netscaler that you have that supports the NITRO API. Since we're running in the Docker container locally, we're just going to say localhost here. And our port, now our port, if you remember, is that 32776 port that we saw a little earlier. And then our default username and password, you can change those to whatever you would like that you have configured on your Netscaler. All right, so what did the generator do here? Well, it created a couple files, and then it also restored some dependencies. So how can we go ahead and look at that? Well, you need a code editor, so we use Visual Studio Code. You can also use brackets or Sublime Text, anything that will let you edit files. We have some links in the repository that you can download from, but we'll actually just take a look at the code here. So as you can see, what got generated was some files. So we have a program CS. This is our bootstrapper kind of entry point for the program. And then we also have an nsauthenticate.cs. What this is basically, this is our authenticate method where we actually are making a call to the HTTP client, setting some username or password information, and actually making a call to the REST API. You can go ahead and take a look at this code after the video or whatever, but just suffice it to say, this is actually how we're making the call into the NITRO API in the container. So if we jump back and take a look at program.cs, you can see here that the information that we entered here is the same that we put in through the generator. So we did kind of some token replacement here. So everything should be ready to go. And then here we're saying await authenticate. Authenticate is the method call that we actually have defined in our NS Authenticate class. So we can call it and we'll print out the return value of that function. So that's basically the project. Nothing real complicated. But how do we get running? How do we actually run this code? So to run the code, we're going to say .NET and then we're going to say run. This has got to be done in the directory where you created the project. So we're going to say .NET run. Now what's going to happen is it's going to take the information that we entered into the generator, the IP address, the port, the username and password, make a call to the NITRO API for authenticate, and then hopefully return some information back. It could return an error code or it could return a session ID or whatever, but we'll see what happens. So we're going to say .NET run here. And as you can see, we're compiling it. So we've compiled the .NET Core app, and then we're actually making the call. So we got some logging information here that we're connecting to, and then we give you the endpoint that we're connecting to. And then what is the return value that we're returning back from the authentication method. And you can see here's the JSON request. Now, for this sample, we're just printing it out to the console, but you could obviously put this back into a plain old CLR object and then do some parsing and stuff like that. But for brevity's sake, we're just showing here's the return value that we got back from the API. Excellent. So we just authenticated to Netscaler. We have a session ID that we can then use for every other API call that we want to use, or we can pass in username and password to each API call too. Either way is sufficient. Either way works. Okay, so that's kind of up and running pretty quick. And how do we do authenticate? But in Yeoman, there's this concept of sub-generators. So what's a sub-generator? Well, a sub-generator, which we have listed here, are ways to create additional functionality once your project is created and up and running. So in our particular case, we have a few different sub-generators. This is going to expand over time as we add more API endpoints to the generator, but right now this is kind of where we stand. So how do we execute these? Well, it's the same kind of thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the host name sub-generator here. So how do we get started with that? So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say yo, call the Yeoman generator. And right before we do that, we're gonna pull up code here, and we're just going to show you some different things. So I want you kind of to pay particular attention to the project structure here as we kind of run this. So what we're going to do is we're going to say yo. We're going to call the Citrix Netscaler generator, and the sub-generator. Now this is always defined by colon, but the sub-generator that we're going to want to call is hostname. Right? So that's the sub-generator that we're going to call. We're going to hit enter. Now this sub-generator is going to ask us what's the value for the hostname if you want to set it. So we're actually going to say John's CPX demo. And we're going to put enter. All right, cool. So if you look at the generator here, the console output, it says we went ahead and added the Netscaler hostname API helper class to the current project. And we give you some documentation that says to use the newly added code, here's what you need to do. To list the hostname, you want to add that, and add the list hostname method into your project. And to set it, you're actually going to want to make the set hostname call like that. And you can see here that we actually in the documentation show the value that you entered for the host name within the generator. So that's kind of cool. You can also look and see that it created an nshostname.cs class, and if we go ahead and look at our project, indeed we actually have that nshostname class. If we go ahead and kind of look at that, you can see that indeed we do have two methods. One is list hostname and one is set hostname. And you can save this for after the video, but you can basically see the calls that we're making to the NITRO API and within the container. So that's kind of cool. So how do we actually use this? Because we haven't really modified the code or anything. Well, according to our generator here, it says let's add this method, await list hostname, into the program. So since it's the sample, we're just going to kind of go into the program.cs here, and we'll add it right after this last write line. So we're going to make that call there, and we'll write out another write line here. And we can do, we'll give some more data here. We'll say write line, making a call. Okay, just like that. Cool. So we'll save this. We'll actually come back here and we'll do the same thing. We'll say .NET run. So we're going to run that class. Okay, so you can see here's the first call that we had, which is for authentication. And now here's that second call that we made to list hostname. So we're making a call to this API endpoint. And here's the value that we're returning, and you can see it's a JSON object that we're returning, and we have no error code, so it was successful. And then here's the host name, which is really set to nothing because we haven't done anything yet. Okay, so we made that call. Cool. So how do we set the host name? Well, if you remember up here it said to set the host name, we actually want to do this. So we want to make this await call here. Cool. So let's jump back to the code here. We'll be in program.cs, and we'll write out some data. So we'll write out a log. So we're going to say set the host name, and then paste that guy. So we're going to list the host name. We're going to set the host name, and then we're just going to copy this, and we're going to list the host name again to see the difference see if our call actually succeeded. So we'll come back to our console here, and we'll say the same thing, .NET run, which means we're going to run our application here. Okay, so again, we just kind of were adding on to these calls. So we're still making the authenticate call. That's great. Here's our first call to list host name, and you can see that returns basically no error code and basically no host name. So now we're setting the host name, so that's our set host name call here. Okay, and you can see here here's the API endpoint that we're making. And the return value is basically no error code and a message of done, meaning it got called successfully. And then now we're actually making a call to list host name again. And as you can see here, the host name has now been set to what we entered into that field. So it's a little different than our initial list host name, which returns null, and the new host name, because we've set it, now returns that value. So that's kind of the host name subgenerator and how you can get started with that. Now there's all these other subgenerators, and you can do the same thing. You execute them the same way. So for example, if we wanted to run to list all the IPs on the CPX or the Netscaler box, we can do the same thing. We'd say yo, which is the Yeoman generator, Citrix-Netscaler, and then we want to say IP. Now some of these subgenerators will ask you for, will prompt you for data. Others will not because they don't need them. So for this particular one, you can see that we added the Netscaler API helper class to the project, and then to use this, we need to call await list IPs. If we jump back to Visual Studio Code, you can see that indeed we've added an SIP to the class or to the project, and then here's our method call for list IPs. So how do we use that? Well, basically the same thing like we did before. We'll go ahead and write out some logs. And then we'll make that call. We'll save this guy, and then we do the same thing here. We'll say .NET run. And you can see we're getting a little bit more data here, but the same kind of thing. So we're doing all the same things that we did before, and then just we're making this new method call, and you can see we get a lot more data back from the REST endpoint that you can then use. You can deserialize into a CLR object and then use it as you see fit, or you can just parse it based on JSON data. So that's in a quick video on how to get started with the Citrix Yeoman generator. Like I said, there are some prerequisites to get going with this. You're going to need .NET Core, Netscaler CPX, or a Netscaler device. You're going to need the Yeoman, Yeoman proper, and then the Citrix Yeoman generator. So always check out the GitHub page for some updates to this. I'm John McBride. If you want to reach out to me, feel free. My Twitter is @JohnMcBride. I'll put a link in the video here. And we'd really like to see what you guys would like from a development standpoint to help you guys get to build more solutions on top of the Citrix platform. So we'll add some links in the video. Go ahead and reach out to me @John McBride, or you can reach out to Citrix Developer. Let us know what you guys want. Let us know how you like the video, and hope it was helpful. Thanks.